you know, strangely enough, I said to some of my friends that, you know, there is one picture that sums up the fall of Saddam Hussein in Iraq, and what that was, and I'm not doing any parallel that President Mubarak is any way close to Saddam Hussein, but that it was the picture of that statues and with a rope and somebody coming up and bringing it down. I think the picture of the fall of the Mubarak regime will be the horses and camels entering into Tahrir Square.
EFG also today released a statement trying to explain to people its relationship with Hosni Mubarak's son, Gamal Mubarak, who they disclosed has an 18% stake in a company that is owned by EFG Hermes.
We made a public statement regarding that. You know, our that relationship started in 1997, well before he went and became a politician. That private equity division, which is a subsidiary of EFG, does not represent more than 7% of its revenue line, and it was reported in a number of places, and this is public information. There is, we did not get any favors from the government. We did not buy any land from the government. We did not get, so irrelevant for us, honestly, whether.
So what happens to that now, to that state now? Do you know?
I don't think even him is under that list, but honestly it's irrelevant for us.
You're the biggest investment bank in the Middle East. You help take a number of companies public, including many of them who have ties to the Mubarak regime.
First of all, we do not deal with the government on privatization. I think in the last 13 years, we've done one privatization. So I just wanted to correct your statement.
Number of companies public.
Private sector companies public, absolutely. And so this is exposure to the economy.
Right. But you took them public.
So did Goldman, HSBC, Morgan Stanley, I don't know, and other companies as well. So I mean, and strangely enough, all of the deals we've done for some of the what you refer related party were joint books with the Global Investment Bank, and not as a sole book run.
Are you worried that when the markets reopen that there'll be an anti-business sentiment? There's fear among a lot of bankers that I talk to that perhaps this populist anger will be directed at business. Do you fear that?
I think honestly it's a price to pay for revolution. I mean, this is not like, you know, you can tell the people, you know, after all of this disparity of income and inequality of income, after a lack of a democracy, and you have this eruption that takes place, you cannot expect people to deal with you as if, you know, we're sitting having a nice chat with a lovely view here. I mean, there will be excesses, and that's a price to pay for democracy.
Do you believe the future is brighter for Egypt?
Absolutely, no doubt in my mind.
And today, while Tahrir Square doesn't have protesters, some of this country's banks did, right at their front door. In fact, that's why the Central Bank of Egypt announced that tomorrow they're going to be closed yet again. And it raises the question, Lara, that so many people in the business community have spoken to you and I about off camera, which is fear of a populist backlash.
And we're already seeing the evidence of that on the streets. Anything associated with the old regime, from business to politics, is being questioned and targeted in some cases. And people calling those who used to run this country thieves. And we're seeing this kind of backlash across the region, people questioning authority. And in Egypt, you know, it's a critical U.S. ally. Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, really the skeleton, the spine of U.S. interests, U.S. allies in the Arab world.
And you wonder, if a protest was successful there, will it be successful in pushing bosses to raise wages? That's the hope, but there's also danger there because jobs are what's needed, and those companies need to provide them.
There's this sort of newfound affinity towards Egypt and love towards it, and I don't want people to just stop now that the revolution is over.
I think the new focus should be that at least people get a decent standard of living and have a sense of longevity to that. So this is what I think the people were aspiring to do when during the 25th of January, and they've been successful in attaining that.
You've heard over and over again that this was a youth-led revolt here in Egypt, and in many ways Tahrir Square brought together the rich, the poor, and the middle class there. We're trying to get a sense of some of that next generation of Egyptians. They pushed for change. Now they're going to have to shape it, they hope. So that's what we're trying to get a sense of over these few days here in Cairo. But now I want to get us back to the U.S. and to Peter Cook, who's trying to put some answers to those very tough questions that are facing U.S. policymakers. Peter?
That's right, Margaret. We want to take a closer look at how the Obama administration has handled the revolution in Egypt and the prospect the revolution could spread to other nations in the Middle East. What does that mean for the United States as well? Joining us now from Washington, Bhalla. She's a senior Mideast analyst for Stratfor. Also from D.C., our Washington executive editor, Al Hunt. And Al, I'll begin with you. Give me your assessment of the administration's handling of Egypt. What sort of grade does President Obama get?
Oh, I'd probably give him somewhere between a B+ and an A-, Peter. But let's understand we're not even at midterms yet. This is just really the first quiz, if you will. There's a lot to be played out. But if the benchmark is Iran circa 1979 or being on the right side of history, I think Obama gets very good grades. On the other hand, much of the policy was ad hoc. They didn't anticipate this was going to happen, and once it began to happen, they didn't really anticipate very well in the first week how it was going to unfold. There also will be complications ahead, and we'll see how they handle those, not just in Egypt. For sure, that'll be very high on the list, but also the whole region. I would suspect, and I don't pretend to be an expert, I would suspect short term this is going to complicate the Mideast peace process, which wasn't in great shape anyway.
Riva, your assessment of the U.S. response to date, and what's your own assessment right now about the biggest risks to come?
Well, the U.S. has a strategic interest, of course, in maintaining stability in this region, but more importantly, maintaining the peace treaty between Egypt and Israel. Yesterday, the military gave a very important statement in which they said that that peace treaty would be maintained. So I'm sure the United States and Israel were very happy to hear that. But if you look at the military right now and how it's managing the transition and the question of elections moving forward and the timing of those elections, I think the United States could run into some public image issues as the military takes control of the situation and as the opposition is likely to get disappointed in the weeks ahead.
Riva, let me follow up and ask you about what are the next countries that you're following most closely right now? What is the prospect for this contagion spreading beyond Egypt to Algeria, to Bahrain, to Yemen, to these other countries?
Well, you can see that a lot of leaders are obviously concerned. It's interesting how some leaders are using things like Facebook to actually keep an eye on the opposition. Syria is a good example of that when they turned Facebook back on in the country. I think Algeria is an interesting country to watch. You know, there's legitimate unrest there, particularly a lot of unemployed youth under 30. And there have been protests there. They haven't quite reached any sort of critical mass to the level of Egypt, but there's also a power struggle in play. You have this kind of common thread in the region over illegitimate succession issues, unemployed youth, a lot of crony capitalism that people are fed up with. But in terms of actual regime overthrow, there isn't any one country that I see in imminent danger yet. There's just a lot of simmering issues that need to be monitored closely.
Al, let me get your sense of the Obama administration again and the level of preparedness, if you will, for the prospect of other turmoil in other countries. There's a lot of talk that there was strife within the administration over the handling of Egypt. Is this an administration on the same page at this point?
Well, not totally, and I think obviously in the last couple of days the National Security Council people have been putting out the word about how prescient they were and how behind the curve Hillary Clinton and Bob Gates were. I think that's a mistake. I don't think that helps the president when they do that, though to be sure there were some differences. And in their defense, I would just say that almost everyone was caught off guard by some of this. There were a few who might have anticipated it, but not very many. And once the Egypt crisis began to develop, no one was very confident as exactly how it was going to end. So I think that the administration deserves, a little bit of a pass on that. However, right now, to begin this sort of internal, we were right and they were wrong, isn't going to help them.
What about the Republican criticism or lack of criticism so far, Al? What do you make of that? And is this already going to become a campaign issue in 2012, or is it not going to be an issue?
Well, if it goes south, Egypt goes south, it'll become a campaign issue because that's what happens to parties in power. Let me give you something that I find just startling. The CPAC, Conservative Political Action Committee, met this weekend. Anybody who was anyone in the Republican field basically was there. A few boycotted because of other issues. One thing that was hardly mentioned at all was Egypt. It was barely mentioned. And that two reasons. Number one, it's not an issue that really turns on the conservative movement. But secondly, they weren't quite sure what to say, which side to be on. And so therefore, there's been very, very little criticism of Obama other than a few pop-offs from the Sarah Palins and the Newt Gingriches of the world. If, however, this thing starts to go poorly, or if the Muslim Brotherhood looks like it's acquiring more power, that will be the centrality of the criticism. But as of now, I think this is not an issue that's going to help Republicans.
All right, Al Hunt and Riva Bhalla from Washington, thanks to both of you for joining us for this special broadcast. Going to send it back to Margaret Brennan in Cairo.
All right, Peter Cook, Al Hunt, Riva, thank you so much for all of that. Can you hear that roar behind me here? It just exploded in the crowd here in Tahrir. We are looking at reports. We are now confirming President Hosni Mubarak is stepping down. He is stepping down and leaving the presidency. This is the culmination now of weeks of public protest. Can you hear this? And that roar you heard at that moment continued well into the 5 a.m. hour. It kept me up, it kept you up. It was really hard to sleep after that because there was just this tremendous sense of excitement and energy coming out of Tahrir Square. And over the past few days, we've talked to the people who also chose not to come during those protests, many of whom have shown up now because this had become, on the day after the uprising, really a place of staking a claim.
And people were proud, and they had the courage to join and jump on this bandwagon, so proud to say, I was there at Tahrir Square, bumper stickers on cars saying, January 25, I was there. It's kind of fast turnaround, but a sense of how people have embraced this. It's very empowering. They were able to make this kind of change, which was inconceivable just weeks ago.
And there are so many names and faces that you've seen during this uprising, but here in Egypt it is being called certainly a revolution. Lara was just talking to you about some of the bumper stickers, the people wanting to really stake a claim to what was accomplished, even those who didn't necessarily play a role. We went out on that last night of Tahrir, the day after Mubarak stepped down, and tried to speak to some of the people who were there in those first few moments, those first few days, who made the decision in the first place to stage these protests. I spoke to one protester in particular whose father, interestingly enough, was a general in the military who told him, don't go there, don't do this, and he defied that. He went. He sent out Facebook messages, and interestingly enough, he made some contact with some businessmen as well. One of them we've been dealing with a lot, Hisham Abdel, who was very, very helpful to us, and they helped him pay to put together this. This is an icon. He said he wanted sort of like a football icon, a football team icon. It says Farah Yanat, the name of the revolution of January the 25th. You can see the Arabic numerals here. And it is being called a revolution, whether or not it ends up truly changing this country. Listen into what he had to say.
This is a logo of the revolution that I designed it during my staying here in these 2 weeks here in Tahrir Square, and I did it as a symbol of our revolution, like in football team, that each one have the same slogan or the same logo, so each one with of Egyptian to feel they are proud of, they have something on their heart.
The question now, what happens to that young, mobilized group of people who want to stake a claim? The day after the celebrations, they came in with brooms, helped clean up the square, and 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 say, this is mine, this is the future I want to have a stake in.
That's right. Some of the organizers of these protests telling us they're turning this movement and its organizational brain into a volunteer corps trying to help neighborhoods clean up, clean up, clean up, clean up, clean up, but some of them are getting involved in politics. They sat down with the military leadership today to pipe in their suggestions.
Including that Google executive, Wael Ghonim, who's gotten so much attention.
He's really driven this forward, and he's represented the bridge to a new future, to sitting down with this new government and trying to make something that they want to see in their country. And this has been called the revolution of the youth, the revolution of the anger. It's been branded so many ways. And that's what's applying across the region, this youth quake that shook this country and is now rippling out across the region.
And you see those emotional commercials and ads running through the names of those who did die, that number being put by Human Rights Watch at 300. Well, tomorrow we'll be back with you live from Cairo. The sun will be up then. It'll be right on In Business in Cairo. We hope you'll join us as we continue to track this developing story.